Hi everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Halbert Studios in the studio. Today we're going to talk a little bit about artwork. We're also going to talk a little bit about why I do some of the things that I do, and I'm going to show you some ideas and some philosophy that I share in all my work. So the first thing we're going to talk about real quickly is I'm excited to be doing this. I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited for today's work and in the future's work. So first thing that we're going to talk about is a little bit of philosophy. First thing that I look at in all my work is three parts, and that's it's a three-tier system. So kind of like a triangle. Triangle has 3 points. Just about everything that I do falls in the realm of threes. So if you think about it in the terms of threes, what we're talking about is like a trinity, sort of. So three colors, they form a trinity. Um, a lot of the times what we're talking about is your three primaries is a good example. Um, Generally speaking, you're talking about your yellow, your cyan, and your magenta. Um, those three colors can combine to make just about everything out there, but it goes a little bit further than that. Typically, when we actually see in threes. This is kind of a weird concept to think about, but it's actually kind of true. If you picture your face, if you go straight down the outside of it, it's kind of the outside, and then your eyes being towards the center, and your nose being the actual true center. So even our face is based off of the three symmetry, which I look at it, and other artists before me have looked at it as the holy trinity of art. And what it can form is it forms a basic principle of 1 1/3. So, um, talking about 1 1/3, you can actually use that in your work. And kind of how I do it is you can separate your canvas into thirds. You can go a little bit further than that, but we're going to get to that much later on. We're not going to talk about that today, but let's talk about the 1 1/3 principle. So I'm going to show you on my paper, and then we'll go from there. So I have selected some newsprint to work on today. I have a black pen. Hopefully it shows up pretty good. If not, in the future videos, I'll change it and we'll go from there. I'll try to use a marker or something like that so you can see it better. Um, so you can do it any way you want. Some artists prefer to literally separate it in a vertical. You've got your 1 1/3, and that's not showing up very well. So let's see if we can change that up real quick. Just a second here. See if I can find a darker marker for you guys. Okay, you can see that a little bit better. So you have your thirds here. You have your upper part, center part, and your last part. You can do it go along horizontally if you want to. You can definitely do it that way as well. So we can go down like that. What's kind of cool about this idea is the fact that it does form a basic grid. The basic grid, the way that it works, is that ideally in your perspective, your main point of horizon is going to generally fall somewhere in this area, either in the first part of the third. It may indeed fall to a perspective view of somewhere in this part here if you want, or even over here. You can do it up here if you wanted to. Main idea though is don't ever put your work here, which is the center of your sheet. It doesn't work out well. I've done it a few times, and it just doesn't look very good. So I don't recommend doing it. There are some others that do it on purpose because they want you to look directly at it, and that is an idea. It's a way to do things. You can do it if you want to. I don't. So that you'll never really find a lot of my work with the work dead center, unless I want to show you something dead center. For the most part, I don't do it. There are some other things that I will do, and I kind of want to talk about it real quick, and that is that to me, I see everything, when I look in the natural world, I see everything in general shapes. Very rarely do I ever actually see it for what it is. I see it in shapes, I see it in colors, I see it, is it a shade, is it light, is it dark? And I actually do that all the time. I don't do it just when I'm working on art. Just when I'm out and about in the world, whether I'm looking at cars, whether I'm looking at trees, whether I'm looking at people. Um, I look at colors, I look at shades. And then I ask myself, is it truly a yellow that I'm looking at? Is it a brown that I'm looking at? If it is a brown, what kind of brown? Is it a darker brown? Is it a lighter brown? I look at yellows the same way. What's cool about yellow is that it doesn't follow a lot of the same rules as most colors. It doesn't work so well on darks. It does well on lights. Um, because of the fact that it is yellow, if you try to add red, you'll actually change its hue. And that's because of color theory. And we're going to get to that later on, and I do use it quite a bit. I use it in the terms of, again, in shades. I use it in the terms of color matching. I use it in the terms of finding an opposite neutral color, or in some cases finding a brighter color to what I'm doing. It just kind of depends on what's going on. I like a lot of blues. I like a lot of greens. As you can see, the one up there, that was one of my first ones that I did. It's got the Triforce on it. That one, those are kind of my three colors that I like a lot. I like playing with them. I like using them a lot. I think they stand out really well. Because of the fact that I use automotive paint, it blends well with my acrylics. The only thing that it doesn't do very well is it doesn't blend pigments very well. What I mean by that is that the pigment color is a heavier color in the automotive paint compared to the acrylic paint. So it just kind of depends on what the effect that I'm trying to go for. If I want more of a granular effect, I can easily mix like a pearl white metallic from the automotive paint with my titanium white in the acrylic, and it'll give like a heavy body. It'll give a heavy body feel, and it'll leave a lot of granular effects to it. So when I'm going for like a mountain or a seascape or something like that, it's really cool to do it because it leaves that heavy body. But if I want a softer touch, I can't mix those two. It doesn't work out well. What I have found is that if you over reduce either the acrylic or the automotive paint, when it comes to the automotive paint, over reducing it will thin it out extremely. It'll thin it out really low, and the pigment won't be as vibrant. It'll make it almost a candy color, but it's not a true candy color. In fact, it's almost kind of a faded chalky color. So you got to be really careful with it. But that's just kind of some of the things that I do. Some of the other things that I will do is, because we talked about basic shapes earlier, I want to kind of talk about some of the basic shapes that I'm talking about. So the basic shapes that I generally see in, and I see a lot of things in it, is going to be your circle, your square, your rectangle, your triangle, and then believe it or not, it's an odd one, but a line. A lot of people will say, well, no, how can a line be a shape? It actually is a shape. It does have sides. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it actually has a center point, depending on how thick you make the line. So it also has an area. So it has a perimeter and an area. So when we go back to the basic geometry, a line is actually a shape. So if we're using that in the general concepts, there's a lot of things you can do with it. There's a lot of different ideas that you can do with it. One of the things is to consider is that all things have an edge. It's whether it's soft or hard edge, regardless of what it is. So when we see things, we see it as typically a soft edge, and the reason that we see it as a soft edge is because we actually see the light beyond. And that goes back to, because of the fact that we see in threes, the way that we see light and depth is either the absence of shade or the presence of light. So if there's shade behind an object, we will see it as a harder line, and that's what we view as a shade, or as what we view as being a hard edge. If it's a more subtle shade, we'll see it as a softer edge, and that'll get softer as we see it in the light. So we do see in the threes being positive, negative, and neutral, and that applies to my artwork as well, is positive, negative, neutral. So positive being what's in front of you, negative being what's behind the object, and neutral being the object itself. So based on that general idea, it's how far back I want it to go, being the negative, which turns into the negative space, which I don't normally have just negative space. I don't view it that way. There's always something beyond the object that you're looking at, and there's always something in front of the object that you're looking at. It's just a matter of deciphering how far back it is from what you're creating, which is what I do. So that's kind of some of the ideas that I have with it. It's what I generally use. I know it's kind of weird. It doesn't follow traditional theory. It doesn't follow what some people do. Some of it does, some of it doesn't. But it's how I see things. Another thing that I see generally, and it's how I create different ideas, is that I generally, when I start working on a project, I'll start with the general concept. General concepts could be, maybe I have this idea of a color pattern that I want. Maybe it's red, black, white. It's a color palette that I want. Maybe it's or maybe I choose like a purple, yellow, brown. It sounds weird. I've actually done that before. It came out really gray, and that's because of color theory, especially when you're going with the purple and the brown, because they're so close together. Things can get muddy real quick. But another thing that you can do, and it's kind of cool, is purple and orange work really well, because if you look at your color wheel, they are opposite to each other. And like I said, we're going to get back to color theory later. I'm not going to do it today. But when you're choosing your color palette, that's kind of something that I do. It's what I start with. It's kind of like what colors do I want. Something else that I might start with is kind of like a general idea of, well, I want to create a landscape. Or maybe I'll start with, I'm kind of feeling something that's abstract. Or maybe I'm feeling like, there's this really cool figure that I saw, or something similar to that. So I'll start with the general concept. From a general concept, I'll generally start prepping my canvas. And while I'm prepping my canvas, this is where some of my magic starts to happen. I will start to feel the canvas as how it looks and how it feels while I'm working with it. I've said before in my previous video, I've always had an imagination. It's always been there. I've always been creating. I just don't always do it on paper, and I don't always do it on canvas. Sometimes I see it just during the day. I will look at objects, and I'll see the entire image as the object is there. I'll see everything that's there, and everything beyond that object. Sometimes I'll picture the porous material. I'll picture the actual pores, or I'll picture, I'll have an image in my head of how a germ cell might look, or I'll have an idea of, well, how does the finite hairs on an arm look? These are all kind of like random things. It's like, why would you ever think about any of this? It's because that's where my imagination runs to. And when I'm doing it with canvases, it's hyperactive, like extremely hyperactive. So what I do is, while I'm looking at a canvas, I will envision, how does it feel? How's the light hitting it? What's the color choices that I've made? And then I kind of relax and let my brain decipher what it's going to decipher. Let my subconscious and conscious in their battle and paint. So something I want to get into real quick, which is conscious versus subconscious. So basic psychology to this. You've got the conscious and you've got your subconscious. Your subconscious is kind of always in the back seat, but it's always trying to jump in the front seat. With it always trying to jump in the front seat, that is actually imagination. That your imagination hides in your subconscious. That's the level that it's at. Your conscious is your waking understanding of reality versus fiction. That's your conscious. That's your ability to be aware. Your subconscious is, it holds the fight for flight. It holds your emotions. It holds a lot of different things. That's in your subconscious. some people argue that you're pre-programmed with an understanding of the general world in your subconscious, and then in your conscious, you are constantly learning. But your subconscious will always fight it because it's always trying to stay with its pre-programming, which is why some people have a harder time learning than others. It's a back and forth fight depending on the skill level that you're in psychology. I'm by no means a doctor. I just happen to be one of those individuals that reads a whole lot and does more than I probably should sometimes, and thinks more often than I probably should. But in my artwork, that's where it rides. I will let my subconscious talk. I'll let it be. I'll let it decide what it wants to do. So with that being said, I'm going to show you some of kind of the ideas that come to my mind when I start working, and then we'll close out the video and we'll talk a little bit about where we went and why we went the way we did. Okay, so just hold on a second. I'm going to bring you closer to the paper and then we'll start working. Okay, thanks for holding on a second. I appreciate that. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of my general ideas. So when I'm working, like I said, I generally let my imagination flow and I let things happen the way that they're going to happen. So one thing that I might do is I kind of look at the way the light hits the paper. I look at kind of how everything is happening, and as I'm seeing it, we've got these really cool little grooves here and here and here. And look, that's a really cool line here and here. So I'll write it. So there we have our line. Not too much of a big deal, but what I'm kind of seeing here, so if we go, we have a nice little line here. I think what we ought to do is we got our little bumps here and here. Kind of thinking that we got like a little, well, we got like some lines here and some here. You know, I'm kind of thinking that what we got going on here is maybe we have a bit of a skyline, maybe. So we'll just kind of start nailing some things in here. You know, again, this is all just letting things happen the way that they're going to happen. Is it always perfect? No, unfortunately, I wish it was true, but it's not always perfect, and there are plenty of times that I have completely messed something up and I've gone back. The most important part when you're working is try not to focus on every negative thing that you do. Just kind of focus on just getting it out there. I was talking with a friend of mine, and it's actually kind of true, that every time you allow yourself to create, you actually learn something every single time. Regardless of how you feel about it, you learn. And as you learn, you pick up really cool habits and cool skills, and you pick up some neat little ideas while you're doing it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. It's all part of the learning progress. And as you learn,